Ethan gripped the wheel, his knuckles white with exhaustion. He had been driving for hours, the dark highway stretching endlessly before him. His GPS, usually reliable, had glitched earlier in the night, rerouting him into a remote area he didn't recognize. The glow of the screen flickered to life again, pinging with a notification. Hollow Rest Hotel, 2 miles ahead. Relief washed over him. He hadn't passed any signs of civilization for miles, and the thought of resting in a warm bed seemed like salvation. As he approached the location, the hotel emerged from the darkness. It stood tall, its neon sign blinking erratically against the backdrop of dense woods. The architecture was peculiar, a mix of modern design and eerie, old-world charm, like something plucked from a different time. Inside, the lobby was strangely pristine. A crystal chandelier cast sharp, angular shadows across the polished floor. Behind the desk stood an older man, his smile wide but unsettlingly still. His glassy eyes seemed to look through Ethan rather than at him. "Welcome, sir," the clerk said in a monotone voice, sliding a key across the counter. "Room 217 is prepared for you." Ethan blinked. "I didn't make a reservation." "We've been expecting you," the man replied without missing a beat. Too tired to argue, Ethan grabbed the key and headed for the elevator. The silence in the hallways was oppressive, broken only by the soft hum of old fluorescent lights. Room 217 was at the end of the corridor. The door creaked open to reveal a cozy room, almost too perfect. The bed was plush, the lighting warm, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. He barely kicked off his shoes before collapsing onto the mattress and falling into a deep sleep. He woke suddenly, his heart pounding. The room was pitch black, the warm ambiance replaced by an icy chill. A faint sound reached his ears, breathing, low and steady, but not his own. His eyes darted to the closet door, which was now slightly ajar. Slowly, he approached it, his pulse hammering in his chest. Inside, he found an old suitcase, dusty and worn. The suitcase clicked open on its own, revealing a stack of photographs. The first few were of strangers, all smiling stiffly. As he shuffled through them, the expressions changed, smiles twisting into grimaces, eyes wide with terror. The last photo made his breath catch in his throat. It was of him, taken just hours earlier, asleep in the very bed behind him. A sudden knock on the door made him jump. He swung it open, but the hallway was empty. A low chuckle echoed from somewhere far off, followed by the faint creak of footsteps. Panicked, Ethan ran to the lobby, but it was deserted. The clerk was gone, the chandelier extinguished. The front doors wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pushed. The intercom crackled to life, a voice distorted and hollow. "You must complete your stay." Determined to escape, Ethan began exploring. Each door he opened revealed something more horrifying than the last. In one room, a man sat at a table, his head jerking unnaturally as he tried to scream, but no sound came out. Another room was filled with mirrors, each reflecting Ethan's image, except the reflections weren't following his movements. They were staring directly at him, grinning. As he fled down a hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly, the hotel began to shift. Walls closed in and twisted, doors vanished, and whispers grew louder. He stumbled into the ballroom, where a gathering of figures stood eerily still. Their faces were pale, their expressions vacant. As he stepped closer, he recognized some of them from the photographs in the suitcase. The figures turned toward him in unison, their lips parting to reveal jagged smiles. "Welcome," they intoned in a chilling harmony. "You've always been one of us." Ethan bolted, his mind racing. He found himself back at room 217, the only door that hadn't disappeared. The room was no longer warm and inviting. The bed had been replaced with an open coffin, and the walls were lined with old photographs, each one of him, in various states of terror. The mirror in the corner flickered, showing his reflection. But it wasn't him. It was a version of him with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. The reflection raised a hand, and Ethan felt his own hand move involuntarily to mimic it. He tried to scream, but his voice was gone. By morning, his car was found abandoned on the highway, the GPS frozen on a blank screen. Locals whispered about the Hollow Rest Hotel, a place that appeared to weary travelers in their moments of weakness, luring them into a web of nightmares. Ethan was now part of its eternal collection, waiting in room 217 for the next unsuspecting guest to arrive. On the night of a rare blood moon, the small, secluded town of Eldermore came alive with a peculiar energy. Normally a quiet place, the cobblestone streets were now lined with glowing lanterns, laughter, and tables filled with steaming food. For the travelers passing through, Emily, her fiancé Jason, and their friend Mark, it seemed like a charming respite from their long, winding road trip. They hadn't planned to stop, but their car's navigation system malfunctioned, leading them into the heart of the town. "Welcome to Eldermore." A cheerful man with a wide grin greeted them as they parked near the town square. "You're just in time for our Blood Moon Festival. Please, stay and join the festivities." The trio hesitated. The townsfolk were unnervingly enthusiastic, their bright eyes and overly friendly demeanor setting Jason on edge. "This place feels off," he whispered to Emily. But Mark, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "Come on, it's free food and good vibes. What's the worst that could happen?" The friends were soon swept into the celebration. Villagers handed them cups of cider and plates of roasted meat. Children danced around a bonfire in the square, their laughter echoing into the night. But as the group moved through the crowd, Emily noticed strange symbols etched into the cobblestones, glowing faintly under the moonlight. "What are these?" she asked a passing villager. The woman's smile faltered for just a moment before she said, "Old traditions. Nothing to worry about." Jason, growing uneasy, tugged Emily's arm. "Let's leave, now." But before they could make their way back to the car, the clock tower struck midnight. The sound reverberated through the square, silencing the festivities. The laughter and music stopped abruptly, and every villager turned to face the trio with blank, soulless expressions. The mayor, a tall man in crimson robes, stepped forward, carrying a ceremonial dagger. "Welcome, honored guests," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "The blood moon shines bright tonight, and its hunger must be sated. You have been chosen to secure our prosperity for another generation." Panic set in. Emily screamed as villagers began closing in, their faces devoid of emotion. Jason grabbed her hand and Mark shoved past a group of townsfolk, shouting, "Run!" They bolted down a narrow alley, but the twisting streets seemed to shift around them, always leading them back to the square. The villagers, unhurried, began chanting in a guttural, ancient language that made the air vibrate with malevolence. Their desperate search for an escape led them to an old, crumbling church at the edge of town. The heavy wooden doors groaned as they pushed them open, revealing a dimly lit interior lined with blood-red candles. The walls were adorned with faded murals depicting horrific sacrifices under the glow of the blood moon. On the floor, the same glowing symbols from the streets formed an intricate circle. Jason slammed the doors shut and pushed a pew against them. "What the hell is this place?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. Emily knelt to examine the symbols. This isn't just a church. It's a sacrificial chamber." Before they could process her words, the doors burst open, and the mayor entered, flanked by a group of villagers. His eyes were now black voids, and his voice echoed with whispers. "You cannot run," he said, stepping into the circle. "The pact is eternal. The blood moon must be fed." Jason grabbed an iron cross from the altar and swung it at the villagers. To their shock, the townsfolk recoiled, hissing and retreating from its touch. "It's working!" Jason shouted. But Emily noticed something strange. The cross was burning his hand, leaving blackened marks on his skin. "Jason, drop it!" she yelled. But he couldn't let go. Realizing the cross wasn't a weapon but a key, Emily pried it from Jason's hand and slammed it into the center of the glowing circle. The symbols flared blindingly bright, and the villagers screamed, their forms melting into shadows that spiraled upward toward the blood moon. The ground trembled, and the church began to collapse. Jason and Mark dragged Emily out just as the building caved in. When they turned back, the entire town of Eldermore was gone. In its place was an empty field shrouded in thick mist. They drove in silence, the tension heavy in the air. As they reached the highway, the car's radio crackled to life. A news report described strange disappearances along the same route they had traveled. "Authorities are baffled by the lack of evidence," the anchor said, but witnesses report sightings of a strange red glow in the sky. In the rearview mirror, Emily caught a glimpse of the blood moon reflected in her eyes. She shivered, a deep sense of unease settling over her. Eldermore was gone, but the curse wasn't broken. The blood moon had marked them, and somewhere in the darkness, it was waiting to collect its due. Ethan exited the supermarket late at night, the cold wind biting at his skin as he carried 2 heavy grocery bags toward his car. The parking lot was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of a flickering streetlight. As he approached his car, a glint of color caught his eye. A flyer was tucked under his windshield wiper. Annoyed, he placed his bags on the ground and yanked the paper off. It was a cheap, poorly printed missing person flyer. A photo of a young woman with wide eyes and an awkward smile stared back at him. Beneath her photo were the words, "Missing. Last seen here? Please help." Ethan frowned. The photo unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Her expression seemed strained, as though she were forcing the smile through sheer terror. The corners of her mouth didn't quite match the fear in her eyes. Shaking off the unease, Ethan crumpled the flyer and tossed it into his back seat. As he turned to unlock his car, a soft, trembling voice called out, "Excuse me, can you help me?" Ethan froze. The parking lot was empty, or so he had thought. Slowly, he turned toward the sound. A figure stood at the far edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. It was motionless, its features hidden in shadow. "Who's there?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with unease. The figure didn't respond, but shifted slightly, stepping closer. The way it moved, jerky and hesitant, sent a chill down his spine. Ethan instinctively took a step back toward his car. "I don't know what you need, but I can't help you," he said, his voice shaky. He climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. He reached for the ignition and turned the key. The engine sputtered but refused to start. "Come on," he muttered, twisting the key again. The engine groaned but didn't catch. Outside, the figure moved closer. It stepped into the glow of a streetlight for just a moment. Ethan's breath caught. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs slightly too long for its body. Its face was a pale, featureless blur, save for a wide, impossibly stretched grin that seemed carved into its flesh. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he fumbled for his phone. As he unlocked it, something caught his eye on the passenger seat. The flyer lay there, smoothed out, as if he had never crumpled it. He stared at it in horror. The woman's image had changed. Her mouth was now open in a silent scream, her hands pressed against glass as if she were trying to escape. A soft tap on the driver's side window made him jump. The figure stood inches away, its face almost pressed against the glass. Ethan's breathing became ragged as it raised one long, skeletal finger and pointed toward the flyer. Desperate, Ethan called 911. The line crackled with static before a distorted voice answered. "Help is on its way," the voice said, stretching the words unnaturally, its cadence eerily familiar. As Ethan tried the ignition again, the interior lights flickered. This time, the engine roared to life. Relief washed over him as he put the car into reverse and sped out of the lot. The figure didn't move, watching him leave with that haunting, unnatural grin. Ethan drove for several miles before daring to glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty. He exhaled, trying to calm his nerves. But when he glanced at the passenger seat, his blood ran cold. The flyer was there again. This time it had a single word printed beneath the woman's screaming face: "Follow!" He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Number no way. "This isn't happening," he muttered. A soft laugh echoed in the car, low and guttural. Ethan's eyes darted to the rearview mirror and his stomach dropped. The shadowy figure was sitting in the back seat, its grin wider than ever, its hollow eyes staring directly at him. "Thank you for helping," it whispered in a voice that was all too human. Ethan slammed on the brakes and turned to confront the intruder, but the back seat was empty. The car's interior was silent except for his own ragged breathing. He was about to get out when his phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a notification. Hesitantly, he picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. It read, "Look outside." Against his better judgment, he turned to look out the window. His car was no longer on the highway, but parked back at the supermarket lot. The shadowy figure stood outside, its grin still fixed, as it raised its hand and waved. The last thing Ethan remembered was its face pressing against the windshield, the grin growing impossibly large, and the sound of shattering glass. The next morning, a supermarket employee found Ethan's car parked in the lot. There was no sign of him, only a crumpled flyer taped to the windshield. Ethan's face stared back from the photo with the same strained, terrified smile as the missing woman. Beneath it, the words read, "Missing. Last seen here. Please help."